All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Mark and Pattie Bjornson. We're at Bjornson Vineyard. It's July 16th, 2024. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for coming.
And the first question, and either one of you can start with this, is why wine?
Well, gosh, we got married in 1989, and at the time when we did drink wine, it was Sutter Home White Zinfandel. We didn't know any better, and we were living in Minneapolis, and Pattie grew up in Owatonna, Minnesota, and so the venue for our wedding reception was the Art Center in Owatonna. Beautiful building from the late 19th century. It had been an orphanage. It was expensive to rent. It was $75 for the night, but they had a rule that you could only have wine there, no hard alcohol, no beer. So we went to Surdyk's in Minneapolis, a big liquor store, went to their sale, and I think we talked to someone and said, we're going to have 150 people there. How much Sutter Home White Zinfandel do we need?
And I remember the wine steward, and he was just holding back his emotions, and he said, might I suggest some other varieties to please everyone's palate? We're like, well, who wouldn't like Sutter Home White Zinfandel? So it's a white wine, isn't it? We were serving chicken and wild rice because we're in Minnesota, of course.
And so then we got through the dinner, and then at the reception, a friend of Pattie's dad showed up in the parking lot with a van with a keg of beer in it. And all of our friends from college emptied out, and people drank beer. So we had all this leftover wine. We had a great little wine cellar in our house in South Minneapolis, and that started us drinking wine. And then I was only able to take one day off because I was in an underwriting training class at Perrydale, and so we didn't get a honeymoon. But then in 1993, after we were married for over 3 years, we took the month of September off and got a tandem bicycle, and we at that point had our first child, Caitlin. She was about 2.5, and I made a little seat between us on the tandem, and she rode there, and then we had a little trailer behind the tandem that she took her naps in, and we biked 1,500 miles all through Europe during that month, and we stayed at a lot of little mom and pop wineries along the Mosel River and the Rhine and through Alsace, and then we decided we wanted a vineyard and winery, and we didn't know any better. And then I'm the youngest of 6 children. My brother is 20 years older than I am, and he moved out to Portland and then later moved to Roseburg, and we would go out to visit him when I was a kid. And I grew up in Bismarck, North Dakota, so I had moved to Minneapolis for the warm weather. Absolutely true. And but then I just thought of Oregon as this tropical paradise. I can still remember the first time I saw a pear tree, and I just thought, wow, this is incredible. There were little pears like that on it. And so I always loved Oregon. I still do. And then we heard they were growing wine grapes out here, and we started thinking about a vineyard and winery out here. And then I remember it was probably around year 2000. We were driving home from a party, and Pattie said, "Mark, you have got to quit telling people that we're going to move to Oregon, buy land, and plant a vineyard. Everybody thinks you're crazy." I said, "Well, I don't give a damn what they think." You know, I kept telling people that, so here we are.
Yeah, so when Mark would, you know, we had, by the, you know, when we were all said and done, we had 4 children. And so we started searching for land in 1993. And we were both living and working in Minneapolis at the time. And so there was only one website that you could look on and find listings. So occasionally there'd be a property and Mark would wanted to go see it, and so only one of us could really go because you know, I would stay home with the kids. And I remember I had this long list of you know, requirements. Okay, you know, what kind of library do they have? What's the kids section in the library? You know, what's the grocery store situation? Do they have more than just spaghetti as a pasta? You know, blah, blah, blah. And one time he went out looking at a property near Gaston, I think.
Gaston.
And he, you know, and I said, "Well, what was it? You know, what were the answers to my checklist?" And he said, "Pattie, for God's sakes, it's 7 miles to a convenience gas station." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So it was kind of having to kind of rethink what it was going to be like living out here. So I feel that, so we saw a lot of really great properties.
But none of them quite worked for us. You know, there was always something. We looked at one property, and I was out in November, and we went out there. McMinnville was all fine, and we got to the property, and I went out with Di Crisp, who manages Temperance Hill and has Lumos Wine Company now, and took him along as a consultant. And, you know, we left McMinnville, and, you know, there was no frost or anything, and we got to the property, and it was beautiful. It was all covered with frost, and basically Di's assessment was, "You're about 3 miles too far west, and it's not going to be great for grapes here." And so we looked and looked. We looked at another property where there were no trees on the property. I think it would have, and now it is a vineyard. It would produce good grapes, but Pattie vetoed it because it looked down upon a trucking firm's kind of boneyard, and so she vetoed that. And then finally, in 2005, I got my day job to move out to Oregon, and I worked and worked to get that to happen. And we moved out here in July of 2005, and bought a house in Portland, and we thought we would spend about a year looking for properties. And actually, the first property we looked at once we moved out here was this property, and ended up closing on it in February of 2006.
We actually walked this property the day before Thanksgiving in 2005. And in November, as you know, it's usually you're socked in with rain and fog. And it was just a beautiful, crisp, clean, clear day. You could see, you know, all of the mountains. It was just, I mean, it was almost fate. And we walked the property, and it had everything that we were looking for and we had been looking for. We wanted a property with a house because the land use laws are, rightly so, really challenging to put a house on a property. And we had always, growing up in Minnesota and stuff, there's a lot of farms with the house right by the road because they have to plow the snow and they don't want to do it a long way. But then they get all the road noise and everything. So we always wanted a property with a long driveway. So our driveway is 1/3 of a mile to our house. So it checked all the boxes of what we were looking for. We wanted more diversity. And there's a creek there's actually 3 creeks on the property, but it has...
The main one is King Creek that runs through.
So it's actually just a beautiful piece of property. So anyway, so we were like talking about it on Thanksgiving Day, and we're sitting in our bedroom, kind of trying to figure out if we were gonna put in all of our life savings and take the plunge and everything. And I just said, if we don't do it now, we're going to regret this for the rest of our lives. So Mark said, well, I'm glad you said that because I was going to do it anyway. And we jumped off the cliff and we have never regretted it.
No.
So we'll come back and pick that up in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about life before wine. So Pattie, let's start with you. You mentioned small town Minnesota. Tell us about kind of life before wine. What were you up to, early life, childhood, into school?
So I lived basically out in the country, but not on a farm. And I joke because southern Minnesota, where I grew up, is a very rich farm community. Corn and soybeans as far as the eye can see. And I joke that I grew up in the valley of the Jolly Green Giant, and I didn't want to have a thing to do with farming. I looked down my nose kind of at farmers, I'm sorry to say. And now after I learned about farming, when we took all the viticulture classes at Schmidt, which I highly recommend to anybody that's, just starting out. It was the best thing we ever did. And I love the farming part. There is like anything in life, when you know more about something, it's very interesting. And there is so much to farming. So I really enjoy that aspect of it.
So now we'll be driving along out somewhere, and Pattie will be looking out the window, and she'll say, "Oh wow, look at that! That's a really nice disc."
It's just so fascinating and interesting, and but anyway, so I grew up. The tractors in Oregon for wine grapes, though, are kind of tiny compared to the stuff I'm used to, But other than that, it's absolutely fascinating. And then after, we met, and we originally wanted to have a hobby farm and like an orchard with apples or something like that. And so then, as Mark mentioned, it kind of evolved to a vineyard once we were in wine country in Europe. But when I was in college, I studied French, and so I did a semester abroad. And the family that I lived with a family of a French deputy, and he had a wine cellar in his house, and we drank wine with every meal, with every dinner. And so I sort of started to get in the habit of drinking red wine, and I really liked it. But then when I came back, that was all kind of forgotten, because Minnesota, college, people drink beer. So then when I did finally get into wine, it was Sutter Home White Zinfandel. So
we all have to start somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell me about in college. What were your plans? What were you thinking your life would be like, your career would be like?
Well, so we were both marketing majors. We both graduated from the Carlson School of Management, Minnesota.
University of Minnesota.
Yeah, University of Minnesota. And I thought that I would get a job more in marketing, and I ended up getting a job with Arthur Andersen and in their consulting division. And so I basically went to computer boot camp through Andersen Consulting and worked in systems in the Twin Cities. Worked at my first job was at Pillsbury. Worked at the University of Minnesota. Worked for Burlington. Worked all over the Twin Cities. I really liked that, and I eventually became more of a business analyst, interfacing between the business people and what their needs were, and the technical people writing the code. And then eventually I became a database architect. So I drew databases. I designed databases for a living. But my job was always kind of secondary, because I could easily get part-time jobs, which is hard when you're a woman. And having kids and everything, I wanted to be close to home, so I could go home with a sick kid or whatever. Mark was definitely really career focused. He ended up going to night school, getting his MBA. While he was working, a lot of overtime, doing underwriting and stuff. So we had a tough start. I mean, there's a lot of work involved. So yeah.
Now we're just relaxed all the
I know,
time. There's no...
We lay in the hammock,
Hobby farmers.
eating bonbons all day long. Yes. So yeah.
So how did you meet?
We met at this at a wine and cheese mixer for a business fraternity, co-ed business fraternity, Delta Sigma Pi. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of these mixers is, if you want to be a potential pledge of a fraternity, for those of you that are not Greek people, which I was not. I was totally anti-Greek in my early days in college, but then I pledged this fraternity, and so the purpose of this mixer is to get to know all the active members, so they know who you are, because they're going to vote on who they want to pledge. And so I remember coming to the mixer, and one of the first persons I met was Mark. And he kept talking to me and talking to me and talking to me. I was like, God, I gotta shake this guy. I'm not mixing, and I'm not gonna get, voted into pledge. But I didn't know at the time is he was the senior vice president in charge of getting the pledge class. So I was already a shoo-in, so by the end of the evening, so.
It would have been no problem. She was cute, and so, all the guys would have voted for her anyway, so it was all good.
So you mentioned a growing interest in wine.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your kind of before you actually made the dive and came to Oregon and started the project. How had your wine education evolved, and what were you? I guess where were you wine educationally in terms of wine? What did you like, and what did you think about the world of wine at that point?
Well, we started really with the wines that a wine steward at Certix had selected for us. We had a bunch of them, down in our cellar, and then we would drink them and kind of pair them with food. We had friends that were kind of getting into wine too. And then every Friday after work, I would stop by Certix, and they had tastings there, and I would, taste the wines and bring back wine. I remember one of our favorites was a Cabernet Sauvignon. It was B.V. Rutherford, And if you bought it by the case, you could get it for $8.99 a bottle. So that was kind of our Friday night wine, because it was more expensive. And so we would have that when we had people over for dinner or something. And actually, a few years later, I remember that wine was like $35 a bottle, around about 2000. It really popped up. And so we got more and more into wine. We went out to California wine country. And then we took a couple trips, maybe 2 or 3 trips out during the summers, and we would hit wineries out here and then taste wine and look at properties too. And I remember one time we went to a winery. I don't think they're in business anymore, but we were talking to them, and we told her, she was the owner, and we told her that we were going to move to Oregon, buy land, plant a vineyard, and maybe have a winery. And she looked at us and she said, "Do you have any idea how much money that would take? Do you have any idea how much work that is? Do you have any idea at all?" And Pattie kind of went like that. And then we're driving away, and Pattie was saying, "Well, gee, I don't know, Mark. Maybe this is completely unrealistic." And I said, "Oh, she just doesn't want any competition." And the next place that we went, actually what happened is we were driving right down here on Wallace Road. And, we didn't know that this would someday be our vineyard, but we were just driving about a half mile down, and I think it's the only time in my life that I've run out of gas. We had this Oldsmobile Silhouette minivan, and when it got to empty, it was empty, and it stopped running. Boom. Unlike any other car I've ever had, it didn't give you like a mile extra or anything. So there we were on Wallace Road, and I hitchhiked to the Lincoln store right down here. And the guy that picked me up sold and serviced really fancy sewing machines. And I told him, we were out here, we were looking at land, etc., thinking about, buying land, having a vineyard. And he said, "Oh, you need to talk to Mary Olson at Airlie. Mary got her MBA at the University of Minnesota, just like you, and you need to talk to her." So we went to Airlie, and as we drove up, it took us longer to get there, and it was after 5 o'clock. And so, we saw the sign, I think it was 11 to 5 or something. And we kind of stopped there a few hundred yards away, and, we were thinking about turning around, and then somebody stepped out of the tasting room, and she looked at the van, and she did this, and so we drove in, and she reopened the tasting room for us, opened a bunch of wines, poured wines and everything, and we were talking to her, and
it was Mary.
Yeah, it was Mary Olson, and I said, "Yeah, we're looking to perhaps buy land and plant a vineyard, etc." And Pattie said, "Well, I know that's really difficult to do, and I don't know if we'll actually do it," and everything. And Pattie started kind of backpedaling, and Mary leaned across the table, patted Pattie on the hand, and she said, "You can do this. You can do this." And so
it's an absolute true story, and every time we're together or whatever, I'm always like, "You're the reason why we're here," because if it weren't for that reassurance, I think I would have said, "No way, I'm not going to do that."
Yeah.
So,
but lot of great people that we have gotten to know in the wine industry, in addition to Mary.
So tell me about the process of getting out here and moving your family out here and relocating to Oregon. What were the biggest hurdles, and what were your first impressions of Oregon, of being here?
Well, we had been out here, several times on vacation, just kind of looking for land. So I think when we moved, his day job moved, I kind of shopped schools, so we ended up, in a good school district in Portland. And then, like Mark said, we were going to just take a year or two or whatever, get to know the area, find a good deal on a piece of property. So finding the property happened much more quickly than we had expected. But not only is it an amazing site, which we were very lucky on that part of it, but we are actually in the Salem Kaiser schools, and Minnesota has amazing schools, great music, sports, the whole works. And Salem Kaiser also has they have amazing music program, sports, the whole 9 yards. So I think that was really the luckiest thing about this property is the proximity to Salem. And Salem is an agricultural community. So if you need a disc fixed, or you need this or that, or you need, we've got every type of tool supply area right at our fingertips, which you really need when you're in farming.
So tell me about getting the vineyard started. Obviously, it was a dream, a long-held dream. How prepared were you, and what were your first steps?
Well, after we bought the property, I think the area here where the winery is now, and most of what is now vineyard, had been like back in the late 50s, early 60s, a wheat field. Then the prior owner had used it for pasture. And then in 1995 and 1996, they planted it to dug for timber. And so it looked like an overgrown Christmas tree farm, but it was not. It was planted purposefully for timber. And so I had said, well, maybe we'll wait a year and plant. Patty said, hey, we've waited this long, let's get this planted now. And so
I think I said, hell no, is what I said.
And so we started planting. We planted 7 acres in the fall of 2006. I had gotten, while we lived in Portland, there was a little shop down the hill from us, and it was called
Wine and Vine.
Wine and Vine. They had
Prime and Vine.
Prime and Vine, yeah. They had a little butcher shop, and then they sold wine. And they had a wine tasting, and I ran down there, and I met Don Hagee from Vidon Vineyard. And actually, on Saturday, Don came out to visit us. But anyway, I talked to him. He also grew up in North Dakota, in Williston, 30 years before I did. But we kind of hit it off. I ran back up the hill, grabbed Patty, and said, you got to meet this guy. And so Don gave me a lot of good advice, and he suggested that I hire or contract with Rob Clark. And Rob and his crew helped us plant the original 7 acres. I ended up doing the tractor work, spraying, etc. and we got our first 7 acres planted, put in an irrigation system. That I learned a lot from that, and over the years
we
now
learned a lot.
I've kind of become an irrigation expert. So we've got that down. So we planted that first 7 acres in 2006. Then we planted another 6 acres in 2009. And then we planted the rest of our 28 acres in 2012. So we have 28 acres here now. And then started building this building in 2013. And I remember in 2012, I was down planting the last of the gamay down here. There's 2 acres of gamay right out in front. And I planted the last plant, and I was limping back to the house. And I thought, oh, I'll never have to plant another vineyard again. Whew. And by the time I got back to the house, I thought, gosh, I'm never going to be able to plant a vineyard again, huh? So the next thing we knew, we'd acquired another property, and that's what we now call Pamar Vineyard in the Perrydale, or just south of Perrydale in the Van Duzer Corridor AVA. And so now there, we started planting that in 2019. Took us a while because we were working on this building, etc. But we started planting that in 2019, and we now have 32 acres planted, about 15 acres producing now, and then eventually we'll have about 50 acres planted over there. Patty made me promise not to plant anything this year, so anyway.
Planting, a block of vines is not only expensive, but also it is probably a 2-year process. You've got to work the fields for the first full year, and that's a lot of work. Not much rock picking over there like here.
We moved over 1,000 tons of rock here.
Yeah, but just prepping the fields, getting it ready to plant, ordering the vines. All of our vines are grafted. You have to order those like a year and a half in advance at least. All the way to, usually Mark likes to plant after harvest in the fall. So you go through harvest, and then you have another big monumental task of planting. By then, once that's done, then the rains are pretty hot and heavy, so there's really no more field work to do. But then the following spring, as soon as it dries out, you have to finish any of the the trellising and etc. So it's definitely a 2-year process, and everything has to happen on time. And if it doesn't, your plants are going to die. So you really, it's stressful. And so I made him take a break this year and just take a breather, financially and time-wise.
Let's talk about the original 7 acres. Mm-hmm. How did you decide what to plant and how to plant it?
Well, we planted 777 and Pamard clones, about 3.5 acres of each. And, we got advice from people, we tasted wines, and we thought those were, great clones, and I think they are still. That was a good move, yeah.
So we were out, our friends were visiting us, and we were out wine tasting. And at the time, right after we bought the property, Mark was like the cholesterol commercial for Quaker Oats. He was like, anybody he'd walk by I just bought a vineyard. I just bought a vineyard, which he really hadn't. He'd bought a piece of property. And so
I was excited.
We were tasting at Patricia Green Cellars, and Pattie Green was there, and her partner, I forget.
Jim Anderson.
Jim Anderson, and we asked her what Pinot Noir clones and what spacing.
Well, it was mostly the spacing we got from her. I think the clonal material, I think a big piece of that came from Don Hagee again.
Oh,
and
okay.
he had Pamar 777 and 115. And talking to him, he recommended Pamar and 777, as kind of our first two to start with.
But yeah, and then I remember Pattie Green, we asked her what row spacing we should have, and I thank her daily for that advice. We do 8x5, and I think it's really good for our site, especially.
So both vineyards are 8x5, so that, I think it works out pretty well. Easier to farm, gives you really good quality. The vines get great light. So
you talked earlier about courses at Schmidt. So tell me about getting into those and what were the big takeaways?
So as I mentioned, I really learned a lot. I say that everything, I'm not a student that just goes out and buys a book and reads it and learns something. I have to go to a class. That's the way I learn. Mark is more, he is more self-taught on a lot of things, and he reads a lot. And but I remember the first class in the viticulture series was an overview class, and it happened to be online. And I was so bummed out because we were both so excited to, get into it and meet people and all that stuff. So, so we had to wait another 10 weeks or whatever. And but we learned a lot. Our viticulture instructor was Al McDonald. He was a great instructor. We learned so much, and we made some amazing friends. We still are friends socially. David and Jean Beck, and
Susanna Owen.
Susanna Owens and John Totten. And I call our group the Schmidt 6, and we go out at least once a year wine tasting. We spend the afternoon together and go out for dinner, and which I got to get on that, plan that. And but we would get together and for dinner, and the Becks already had an established vineyard, so I remember, walking through their vineyard and seeing, the green grapes and before raisin and all this stuff. And it's been just a blast. I think, so we learned so much, and we made some lifelong friends.
And Al McDonald was a great instructor, but he also owned Andon Vineyard, and his kids owned Seven Springs right beside us, so he was a neighbor. And I think we learned a lot from him, and we're very fortunate to have him as an instructor. And then we took winemaking and ology classes, and we had Barney Watson, and Barney was just an incredible instructor for us.
Yeah, I remember being tired and dragging into class one night, and we were going to talk about pumps, and I'm thinking 4 hours on pumps, I mean, my God. And then before you know it, it's like, it's time to go. That was so interesting.
Yeah. And
he just was so dynamic and excited about everything, and excited to share his knowledge. He was amazing. So we were really, really fortunate.
And then Pattie worked 3 years as an intern at Bethel Heights and worked with Ben Castile, and I think learned a great deal there. So I do more on the vineyard side, and Pattie was our chief winemaker until through 2019, and then now we have Scott Sabadini. But Pattie worked with Ben Castile and learned a great deal there too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Castile family. I mean, Ted gave us advice about planting, and he's always there if you have a question. We call, he's one of the first people we call. And, I remember talking to Pat Dudley and Marilyn Webb. Everyone knows Pat, but Marilyn is Terry Castile's wife, and that we were gonna, start a little tasting room here, and they looked at me and they said, you're gonna be like the lonely Maytag repairman, you should wait a little while before you do that. And it was good advice. The Castile family has given us, we're very indebted to them. But I mean, I remember calling when I was doing the winery application. I had to call Christum, Steve Dorner, and I'm like, Steve, I don't know if you know me. I'm your neighbor. He said, oh yeah, I know you. And what do you need? And he answered all my questions about winery and how many gallons of water you'd be using and blah, 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 blah. And so now when people ask us, we are, paying it forward, just like everyone that helped us. So it is true. There is so much camaraderie, and I was just talking to Lois Cho, who she and Dave Cho made their wine here a couple of years, and they planned on only being here 1 year, but there was delays, and so they're finally getting into their winery this fall. And I said, Lois, if you need help doing all the compliance and all the paperwork, not that I enjoy it, but I've got it down, so I'll help you. And so she should give me some social media lessons, though.
For all of us.
Yes.
They're pretty incredible people.
Tell me about the division of labor. Obviously, you mentioned winemaking for Pattie and Mark here on the vineyard side. Was that planned, or did that just sort of happen?
I know always Mark wanted to be a farmer of one type or another, so that was, I think that we were going to be more jointly making the wine in our original concept, but there's just so much work, and I don't think our original concept was 60 acres of vines, originally. So, but yeah, I also am in more, so we feel like we kind of have three businesses. We have the vineyard, and we do sell a lot of fruit still. So a lot of our winemakers do a vineyard designates. So we get consumers here that are following, coming to see the vineyard and then tasting our wine and so on. So we have the vineyard as a business. That was our primary business. Then we have the winery, and we have always been sort of a co-op winery. So we've always had winemaker partners. Dave Cho is moving out, but we still have a lot of little, we have Cedar Fire, which is now an up and coming winery, etc. And then we have the tasting room. So we kind of have these three distinct businesses. And we just opened a satellite tasting room in McMinnville this year. So
congratulations on that. That's really
Thank you.
Thanks.
Really exciting. Let's talk about the vineyard part first then. That was the first thing, and you mentioned you planted all Pinot Noir to start.
Yeah, so in 2006 we planted 7 acres. Then in 2009 we planted another 6 acres, different clones. So we planted 115, 667, and Wadensville, more 115, just 1.2 acres each of Wadensville and 667. And then in 2012, we planted 2 acres of Gamay, 3/4 of an acre of Chardonnay, and 3/4 of an acre of Auxerrois. And then the rest Pinot. And planted some different clones. We planted 4407, but then quite a bit more Pamar clone, and a little bit of 115, and some 777 as well.
So why the decision to plant, why the decision to plant non-Pinot varieties, and how did you choose what to plant?
Well, we like Chardonnay, and I thought at that time there wasn't much of a market for Oregon Chardonnay, but I thought that might grow, and I didn't think it would grow as much as it did, or I would have planted more Chardonnay. But I thought having some Chardonnay would be good. And then we had made wine. We made a barrel of Gamay from salvaged grapes that we got from Schmidt Community College, because nobody was going to pick the Gamay, so we just went out there and picked it and made 1 barrel of homemade Gamay Noir. And
we called it Wild Night because my maiden name is Knight, so it was a great little label that I handmade too.
And so it was. It actually turned out to be really good. And at the time, Al McDonald estimated, that was in 2010, he estimated that the Gamay was cropped out at about 10 tons an acre. I mean, it was just this solid wall of fruit, unbelievable. And so I thought, well, we'll plant a couple acres of Gamay. I think there was a little bit of interest with a few winemakers then, but by the time we got our first Gamay crop, everybody wanted Gamay, and that's still the case today. I could sell a lot more Gamay if I had it. And so now we have 2 acres here and 2.5 acres over at our other vineyard of Gamay Noir. And not only does it sell very well in our tasting room, but all the winemakers want Gamay. So that kind of sparked in me the thought that, gee, and reinforced by my friend Jeff Havlin, who planted a bunch of strange varieties, that there's a demand for them, and it doesn't have to be that big of a demand because there's virtually no supply. And so I found that to be true myself, that people want some of these different varieties that are not widely grown in the Willamette Valley.
So tell me about your farming practices. When you set out, when you planted, when you started farming, how would you describe your farming practices, and have they changed? Haven't
changed a lot. I think I would say sustainable, and I follow the science. I'm interested in what Patty Skinkus at OSU says, rather than kind of listening to some of the vineyard lore or whatever they're doing in Burgundy at the time. We've got different climate, different rainfall patterns, etc. And I think listening or reading about the best science is important. I want us to be sustainable and to be really good stewards of the land, and that includes, very importantly, minimizing carbon impact. And so we keep a permanent cover crop. Once we plant grapes, we've never cultivated, and I think people told me. I mean, one pretty well-known vineyard manager I talked to, I was talking to him, and he said, well, if you're planting young vines, you have to cultivate. And I said, well, but I'm going to have drip irrigation. I think I can get by without it. And he said, no. Even with drip, you have got to cultivate, or your vines will never amount to anything. And I said, well, have you ever tried a permanent cover crop? And he said, no, I'm not that stupid. And, we've had a permanent cover crop. We have gotten crops in every block are by third leaf. Our Wadensville and Chardonnay, we got a crop second leaf. And we've had great scores, good quality, good quantity. What's not to like? And we've done it all with a permanent cover crop. And I think a lot of people don't realize when you cultivate, you're releasing a huge amount of carbon from that soil, and that's going up into the atmosphere. If you keep a permanent cover crop and you're mowing, every year more and more and more organic material builds up from the cover crop mowing, and also from the prunings from the grapevines. If you cultivate, we don't lose much or any from water erosion. The soils here, they get wet, they get sticky. And so I don't see that you lose much from that, but you'll see other vineyards cultivating, or when they have cultivated, we get these huge winds here, and you'll see a big dust cloud blowing away. And you lose 1 millimeter to 0.5 millimeter a year that way. And that doesn't sound like much, and it almost sounds funny to say this, but in 1,000 to 1,500 years, all your soil is going to be gone. So in our lifetimes, that doesn't, it seems like that's so far away we don't have to think about it, but it's a relatively short period of time. And the Romans, the Greeks ruined huge swaths of land that used to be wheat and stuff, and now it's just stony, barren land. They've got a few sheep on it, and they ruined it quite organically because that's all they had, but they ruined it by cultivating and cultivating and cultivating until all the soil was gone. And it took about 1,000 years, but it's gone.
How does it change to have more acreage? Obviously, that to be up to towards 50 acres now. And how does it change to have different varietals? Has that impacted the way you farm at all?
More acreage, is more labor and more cost. But you do get some economies of scale with equipment then. So your cost per acre goes down a little bit. So that helps, and I'm saying just a little bit, your irrigation systems, etc. You've got your kind of base, and then adding new acreage costs much less. So you do get the economies of scale with it. But we pretty much do the same thing in terms of the different varieties. We have a little chart or a little family tree downstairs. All these wines are not only the same species, but they're like the same family. They're very closely related. So there are differences between the different varieties. Most notably, Gouais Blanc, which I've got a little less than half an acre of, seems to grow differently, much more vigorous than any other vine, looks different than the other vines. But for the most part, you can treat Chardonnay, Pinot, etc. the same. You can do a little bit different with some varieties. For instance, out front here, especially if you came in the wintertime, you would notice that this is cordon and spur pruned for Gamay, while our other grapes are cane pruned. And the reason for that is you can get by with that with Gamay because Gamay always sets such a heavy crop. If you do that, I've experimented with some short rows of Pinot, and from time to time you get just dramatically reduced crop with cordon and spur pruning. So it doesn't work as well with Pinot as it does with Gamay. And I think eventually over at the other property, I'll spur prune my Gamay as it gets a little bit older, but I'll probably also spur prune the Mondouse Noir as well. So you can treat the varieties a little bit differently, but for the most part, it's the same farming techniques.
So Patty, let's talk about the winery part first, or next then. Tell me about, I guess, the process of getting the wine off the ground, and what was it initially like for you making the wines?
So 2014 is when we started making wine here. I general contracted the shell of the building, which included the production area in the basement. And I call 2014 that fall my near-death experience. So it was, first of all, we failed right in the late August. We have a fire pump and a sprinkler system in the building, and we failed the test. And so we had to, over Labor Day weekend, got a guy with a little backhoe in, and he had to dig up all of the lines from my water source to the pump, and we had to reinstall 6-inch lines.
Yeah, so we had 4-inch lines coming from these two big tanks, 10,000 gallons. We had to change the 4-inch lines to 6-inch lines because the pump was cavitating. That is, it couldn't pull the water fast enough. And, getting the 6-inch lines with even a 3 or a 4-inch line, you've got a little bit of play where you can be off a little bit and kind of bend the PVC pipe. With a 6-inch line, there's no give to it, at least over those kind of spaces. So my daughter Caitlin and my son Chris and I redid those lines, frantically doing it. Caitlin and I were kind of the brains, and Chris was the brawn pushing them together. Because when you push those pipes together, the big pipes, with the glue, you push them together, and they will push back again. And so fortunately Chris is very strong, and he would hold them together as we did that. But it was quite the Labor Day exercise, but we got it done. And what you got, occupancy?
So then we had to have a retest, and I mean, I was just walking on eggshells because I had custom crush clients coming in, and I had other winemakers that were going to make their wine there. So fortunately we passed, and then 5 days later grapes came in the door. And and it was just okay, now we're using this equipment, and will it work? Because we bought used equipment. This has always been a pay-as-you-go winery, so we start out and then kind of upgrade as we go along. And so getting the equipment to work, and then we needed a compressor, and the compressor wasn't working on something, so we have a compressor at our barn, so we got that working.
Peeled that
Remember
down.
and
Yeah.
just, oh, we don't have a shovel, we need a shovel. Oh, running to Davison's every night after, work, getting, handfuls of supplies and everything. It really was a near-death experience. One of our tenants at the time, who was our winemaker before 2014, John Groschow, and a very calm, cool, and collected guy, really, I think we should put this here, and I think this should be where this lives. And I mean, he really kind of
helped us a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't.
So he was making his wine here.
Yeah, and
at
so
the
he was
time.
renting
Yeah.
space from us, and he was also kind of, setting up our winery for us. You better go get some of this, okay? So whatever. So it was crazy, and I don't envy Dave and Lois Cho.
Yeah.
They're gonna go through the same thing, but they're younger, so they'll manage. But yeah, it's just I mean, I don't think there's anybody that starts a new winery and doesn't go through the same thing. I mean, Drew Voigt, who also made his wine here and then moved to McMinnville, I think they worked without a roof, that first year. So thank God we had a roof.
Yes,
but
yeah.
we didn't have any siding on the building, so it was crazy. So, yeah.
Oh, we got it done.
We did. We survived. So.
And what about making the wine? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it is. I absolutely love harvest. It is my favorite time of the year. It is intense, work, and it's a little bit of, besides a lot of work, it's a little high stress because of making the pick decisions. The pick decisions are the most important when you pick the grapes. And when you don't have a lot of experience, you have to wait a whole year to taste that grape juice and learn from it. So over the years, I've gotten better at tasting juice, but it's very stressful. The second most important decision, I think, in winemaking is when to press. And so I did get a lot of help from, like I said, John Groschow and Drew Voigt, et cetera, over the years. And then once we hired Scott Sabadini, I enjoyed it even more because if you have two people tasting things and to bounce ideas off of each other, it's more than half the stress goes away because you can help each other. And I would always do really well at the beginning of harvest, by myself, all the stuff coming in, all the paperwork, managing, the fermentation and the cap management and all that. But then by the time we were all through that, and then managing clients too, and issues that come up with running the water and or running the winery, then by the time it was barrel selections for what to put and all those things, I was just kind of like I don't know, one new barrel per lot, I don't know what else, and Scott's really good at that. And he has a lot more knowledge about different barrel coopers, working with different varieties. So he's made wine in Napa, Sonoma, in Washington, and New Zealand, and Italy, and Argentina. So he's made wine around the world, all different varieties. He's very calm, cool, and collected under pressure. So it's a good match.
And you mentioned sort of the third tier here is the tasting room and the hospitality. So tell us about the evolution of that and about, I guess, sort of the hospitality experience here at Bjornson.
Well, I think we have, I think we are really well known for giving great hospitality. And I think that for the first few years, we had Jerry Rash working for us, and he really set the tone and set the stage for our business, and we're very grateful for the amazing job that he did while he was here. So we just, customer is king, and we need to create a unique memory for every person that walks through the door. These are Jerry's words, and I believe them too. He says when somebody walks through the door, you just won the lottery, because there are over 1,000 different wineries to go to in Oregon now. So if somebody comes to your door, you need to greet them, you need to treat them well, you need to give them a memory. And we are lucky that we have after many years a beautiful tasting room and beautiful view, and we have really incredible wines. So I feel like we have everything that we need. We have incredible views, award-winning wine, and friendly, knowledgeable staff. Our staff are very friendly and very knowledgeable.
I think we try to be very knowledgeable, and we do have great wines. We've got a very knowledgeable staff, but we're not pretentious about it. And I think we can appeal to a pretty wide range of people. That we've got people that come in that don't know much about wine at all, but they know what they like, and they oftentimes like our wines. And then on the other end, we get people in that are really sophisticated, and I think they appreciate our wines, they appreciate the variety, and they appreciate the knowledge of our staff and us, and kind of taking them through some of that.
Yeah, we have monthly all staff meetings, and we a lot of times assign a different variety, and somebody in the staff has to research and go out and buy some wine, and we do a tasting of that. And we're trying to focus on because we have so many unique, this year we did 24 different SKUs. 7 of them are all Pinot, but all the others are just unique varieties. So
and we're now growing 14 different varieties.
Yeah.
And then occasionally we'll buy stuff, like we have a Gewürztraminer that we bought the fruit, a Riesling. What else?
We have been purchasing Pinot Blanc, and now we're growing our own. So.
And also a Cabernet Franc Malbec blend from Kiona Vineyard in Washington State, Red Mountain. So a few different things that we buy. I would say 95% of our wines, we grow the grapes, but we buy from time to time, and then of course we sell a lot of grapes too, about half of our production.
I'm curious about that, about finding buyers for grapes, and about sort of developing those relationships. Obviously, you're farming for yourself. Yeah. You're farming for the land. Mm-hmm. Tell me about farming for other people, and about sort of how you find the right clients for the right grapes.
Well, John Groschow has been buying fruit from us since 2009. We tend to have long-term buyers. Christum buys from us. Ben Castile for the Terrence David label. Sometimes Bethel Heights, and they've done a Bjornson Vineyard designate as well. Denison Cellars, Tim Wilson.
A fellow Minnesotan.
Yes. That's right.
Great, and a great guy and a great winemaker. Tom Fitzpatrick of Elevate has been buying from us for quite some time now, and is just a great winemaker. I love his wines. Soko Blosser buys Gamay from us. Kristen buys both Gamay and Pinot Noir. Chris Butler buys Gamay both from Bjornson and from Pamar, makes great wine with that. Now he's expanding into Sauvignon Blanc from Pamar Vineyard. Let's see, Grant Culture buys Pinot Meunier. Let's see.
He's got 23 different
Yeah, there's so many different.
winemakers this year.
I'm sure I'm forgetting a few of them. I'd need to pull up my spread. Yeah, Sebastian Marquette makes his wine right here and buys the fruit from us and makes lovely wines. So yeah, it's really fun to work with all the different winemakers and see what they produce. But you can taste through the different wines that come from this vineyard and the different Pinot Noirs, and you can taste the vineyard through all the different winemakers. It's kind of interesting.
So you talked about taking a year off from planting anything new. Tell me about the future a little bit, about what comes next. Is there anything on the horizon you're excited about, personally, professionally, or anything, any projects you haven't done yet that you want to do?
Well, let's see. I think we're just starting now to get some of the really unique varieties into bottle. We're going to have a number of different clones of Chardonnay from Pamar Vineyard, and I think we're excited about that because the Chardonnay from Bjornson is just clone 76. So now Scott and Pattie will have more different clones to play around with. We have got our Mondouse Noir in tank ready to get bottled soon. That's from 2023. And that everybody that tastes it really likes it. It's unique, but just a very pleasurable wine to drink. We've also got our Chenin Blanc in tank ready for bottling. And actually, that's what I was drinking last night.
No, that's the Gouais Blanc. The Chenin Blanc,
is
misbehaving. It's
Oh,
not. It's not.
I'm sorry.
It's not ready yet.
I got that mixed up.
It's still in barrel.
They're both awaiting bottling. But hey, I was drinking the Chenin Blanc last night. Pattie had taken a sample bottle out, and it's great. We've got our Sauvignon Blanc in bottle now, and that has been very popular. And so we're going to see these new varieties come online. This year we're going to get our first Cab Franc. We've got 5 acres of Cab Franc, and Ben Castile will be buying some of that, John Groschau, and we'll be making the rest of it. So I'm very excited about the Cab Franc. Let's see. And then this last fall I have planted Melon de Bourgogne, and I love oysters, particularly if you get really good raw oysters. And of course, the classic wine in France for raw oysters is a Muscadet, and that's made from Melon de Bourgogne. And I know John Groschau and Hubert at Helioterra have made great melons. And I'm really excited to have that. And I'll probably work with John and perhaps Anne on that too. But we'll have our own Melon de Bourgogne, so I'll have the oyster wine that I want.
We also have 2 grandchildren and a new one on the way. I'm kind of I'm going to try and start working myself out of the job a little bit. I worked my way up into executive winemaker where I get to do a lot of paperwork. And I want to ditch that. But I want to do some more traveling, get back into shape, and yeah, so traveling is becoming more and more of a priority. So we have some really dear friends in Minneapolis that are having a party on July 19th, and all of our college buddies are going to be there. And I just, decided, I didn't even tell him, I bought some tickets, so we're flying in. We're flying in Thursday.
I usually have no idea what's going on.
We're flying in Thursday. We're going to help him get ready for the party on Friday. We're flying out Sunday to attend our 2-year-old granddaughter's birthday party. So, and I'm just glad we're doing it, because life is short. You never know.
So we did manage, in '93 we took a tandem to Europe and biked through Europe with our oldest daughter. And then in 2018 we biked all the way down the Loire River on this great little bike path called Loire Velo with our 3 youngest kids. Pattie and I rode a tandem, and they each had single bikes, and that was just an amazing trip. And then earlier this summer, we took a trip around the British Isles. So we were on a ship, and then everywhere the ship docked, we would jump off and take a 30 to 50 mile bike ride, and we rented an amazing Santana tandem titanium frame. It weighed nothing. It was really great. And so it's kind of nice, coming back to the ship every day. And, it was very easy, but we'll probably try to get over more often and do more trips like that, and try to do some with our kids too. So
Active relaxation.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. You've talked a bit about sort of all the people in Oregon wine who you've worked with, kind of impressions of the industry. So tell me a little bit about, I guess, where the industry goes from here. What do you see coming next for Oregon wine? What are you excited about, and what are some of the challenges?
Well, I think the Willamette Valley is probably better positioned than almost any other wine growing region in the United States, in that we're a very cool area, and things are getting warmer, and so far that's helped the industry. If you look back at in the 60s and 50s, from the data there would have been many years where grapes just wouldn't have worked here. They didn't have the growing degree days to get Pinot Noir ripe. Now we do. If you could freeze it right where we are now, that would probably be ideal from my perspective. But inevitably, I think things are getting warmer and will for some time to come. So that's going to be a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us too. I've planted 5 acres of Cabernet Franc. We're growing Mondouse Noir, and got it ripe in 2023, which was not a particularly early or warm year. We've got a half an acre of Chenin Blanc that we got ripe again in 2023. It was a bit of a nail biter, but it worked out, and it's a beautiful wine now. So I think there's opportunity that way, but also challenges as things get warmer. And I think it's important that we do everything we can to mitigate things. On our winery here, on the back side, we have solar photovoltaic, and we've got also hot water solar. So all summer long and well into the fall and part of the spring and even in the winter, all of our hot water at the winery is produced by this hot water solar system. We've also got that up at our house, so that helps. So we've got solar photovoltaic here at the winery. We've got a large array up by our house, and then over at Pamar Vineyard, we have solar photovoltaic on the south side of our building. And in fact, when we built the building, it was oriented just perfectly for solar. And so we generate more solar, or we generate more electricity from the solar than we actually use over at that site. We do regenerative farming practices. Most importantly, the cover crop. And let's see, we have 2 electric cars, and we have an electric buggy, that we drive around. And I'm eagerly awaiting when I can buy an electric tractor that really works from a practical perspective. I'm not quite willing to be on the bleeding edge. I'll be on the leading edge of that.
We prior to our solar installation here, we were on the bleeding edge of wind, and that was.
Everybody makes mistakes, Patty. Everybody makes mistakes.
But and even in the wine on the winemaking side, I would just say that I think Oregon has already caught the attention of the world. Yeah. And I think but we're just at the beginning, so I think it's really going to accelerate, and I think we will. I think we will be as famous and sought after as Burgundy in the future. Mm-hmm. I also am really excited on. We made the decision to switch to Ravino glass for our bottlings. Unfortunately, we couldn't. We were going to do it just across the board. It was a hard decision to put a $60 bottle of Pinot into this lightweight glass. But I decided that if you're going to do it, you have to do it. So we decided to do it across all of our wines, the least expensive to the most expensive. And I really believe in that, and I really hope. It's been really fun working with the folks from Ravino, and they're young and they're working really hard to get that all worked out. And I really hope that they can make it work.
And I think they will.
Yeah, I do.
There's a lot of support from the industry overall,
and
particularly in the Eola Amity Hills here.
Yep. So we were not able to get it for the glass in time for our spring bottling, but we'll have it for all of our stuff this summer and next and late December, or when we're bottling. So.
Yeah, excellent. That's all the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't cover that you wanted to cover here today?
Not that I can think of.
No, I think we've.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
this was a lot of fun.
Good, thank you.
Really appreciate it.
We appreciate you taking the time to be part of our story and sharing your story with us, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're out here at Pamar Vineyard with Mark Bjornson. It's July 16th, 2024, and we're talking about Gouais Blanc.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Well, Gouais Blanc is an ancient variety, widely planted in the Middle Ages in France and Germany, and Pinot was also widely planted, and so Pinot was the wine of the nobility. Gouais Blanc was the wine of the peasants. Now, starting around 1700, the French made Gouais Blanc illegal to grow. So there's very little Gouais Blanc left in the world, less than 5 acres according to the University of Adelaide. There's no commercial plantings in the Western Hemisphere except here at Pamar. And so Bjornson makes a Gouais Blanc, and that's the only Gouais Blanc you can get in the United States. There's a couple of small producers that do a Gouais Blanc in Switzerland. They call it Gouais, but we're not able to get that. So it's probably good to start looking. We're between a row of Pinot Meunier and Gouais Blanc. Let's start looking at the Pinot Meunier. You can see a cluster here. See how it's a young cluster, of course. The berries are still going to grow, but look at how tight that cluster is. And then look at the leaves. You know, the leaves are kind of, a light green, kind of dusty look to them. Then let's look over here at the Gouais Blanc. So you can see here's a cluster, much looser. The berries are bigger, and believe me, these berries are going to get a lot bigger. They'll get probably the diameter of a nickel or so. So these clusters are going to get huge.
Wow.
We're going to have to drop some of these because Gouais Blanc wants to put on an even heavier crop than one of its children, Gamay Noir. And so here you can see, look at the size difference in leaves. This was a bigger leaf of Pinot Meunier. Look at how big the leaves are on the Gouais Blanc. Here we've got a little flower. The Gouais Blanc just wants to put on more fruit and more fruit. So what we know now through DNA testing is that Gouais Blanc is the parent of 81 different varieties. It's the parent of Riesling along with an extinct variety, and then along with Pinot, it's the parent of 21 different varieties. So the parentage is Pinot and Gouais, and some of those varieties include, most famously, Chardonnay, but also Aligoté, the other white wine of Burgundy. We've also got Auxerrois, Melon de Bourgogne, and Gamay Noir. So all of them are full siblings, all of them having the parentage of Pinot and Gouais Blanc. So while there's lots of Pinot around, this is the only Gouais Blanc. So it makes a very high acid wine, works well with raw oysters, probably most similar, I would think, to a Muscadet or a Melon de Bourgogne.
What made you decide to plant it?
I tried to get it. I couldn't get it anywhere in the United States, so I had to grow my own. But seriously, I thought, if I can't get it, how many wine geeks are there out there that want to taste Gouais Blanc and can't get it? So I thought having some Gouais Blanc would be a good idea, and I planted a little less than a half an acre here. And of course it produces pretty heavily, so we get a fair amount of Gouais Blanc. We limit it in the tasting room to 2 bottles each for consumers, and we get a lot of interest in it. People come to our vineyard specifically for the Gouais Blanc.
How did you get your hands on it?
Well, because of Gouais Blanc being the parent of all these different varieties, researchers wanted to study it, breeders wanted it to use for breeding. So UC Davis Foundation Plant Services, or Foundation Plant Services, which is a joint venture between UC Davis in California and the USDA, has 14 plants, and every year they give away the cuttings from those. And the year we asked for it, these were planted in the fall of 2019. The year we asked for it, we were the only ones that asked for it. So we got all the cuttings, and so we got enough to make almost a half an acre here.
And you mentioned people wanting to see it, wanting to try it. What has been the response from people when they've tried it?
People really like it, and we had an industry party. I think we ordered 25 dozen raw oysters. I said to my winemaker afterwards, we should have probably ordered 30 dozen raw oysters. He said, well, you could either do that or just not invite your son Hunter. Hunter was eating the raw oysters were just fantastic, but it paired very well, and so people in the industry were very excited about it. First of all, to taste it, but they loved it with the raw oysters, and it did. I think it kind of beat out 2 Muscadets for popularity, but John Groschow or I had a couple of bottles of Milan de Bourgogne that John Grochow had made, and that was a little better than the Gouais. But for a wine that was made illegal because of poor quality, makes a pretty good wine.
Do you think it will be something that has a renaissance, that has a rebirth in the United States? Will it be something that more people are excited about, or is it going to be kind of a niche grape?
I think the latter. It's going to be a niche grape. People have asked me, are you going to plant more of it? And I said no. I remember when we first had it bottled, we were tasting it in our tasting room with our employees, and everyone was quite excited about it. They were saying, wow, this is really good. And at the same time, we had our Pinot Blanc out, and I had a little taste of Pinot Blanc, and I had a little taste of Gouais Blanc, and I was going back and forth between the two of them, and I said, well, you know, if you had to make one of these two wines illegal to grow, the French made the right choice. So it probably it's not what the French call a noble grape, and it probably doesn't deserve to be a noble grape, but it's pretty interesting to try, and it makes a very good wine, particularly where you want a pairing with a fairly high acid wine with something like raw oysters, shellfish, something like that. I think almost any fish it would go really nicely with.
Is pruning, do you know, like, do you kind of do it similar to anyone, or is it very like?
I think our pruning and our hedging, like what they're doing right now, leaf pulling, is pretty industry standard. I think we use vertical shoot positioning, otherwise known as the Gouais style, and I think that's very common in the Willamette Valley and seems to work well, produces good quality, reasonable quantities, and we, at least there, are pretty much following the standard in terms of how we prune, how we position shoots, how we hedge, etc.
With these giant leaves and giant clusters, what does that change about the kind of the annual viticulture part of this?
Well, I'm learning about this. I do need to drop more fruit with this. It will just put on a gigantic crop, and the vines are not old enough yet to really support that. So here's a better example. If you can zoom in on this cluster, think about how that cluster is going to look when it gets a little bit longer, and all these little berries that are now, the size of peas, get to be, maybe as big around as a nickel. So that this cluster will weigh at least a half a pound, probably more. And there's lots, so you can see here, there's lots of clusters. So we're going to have to go through and clean that up. We'll drop fruit fairly soon, and probably drop about 25% to 35% of the clusters off of here, and we'll still get a big crop.
All right, I think that's all we need from you.
Excellent.
Thank you. That was fantastic.
Thank you.